Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, to part three of our discussion series. If you missed one or both of the first two parts of the series, never fear. You can really listen to them in any order. It does not really matter. But part three is today. It's what we have for you. And it's something unlike anything we've ever done before. We're going to be doing some in-the-moment feedback to a pre-recorded discussion that one of Amanda's past classes participated in. Hi, Amanda.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm here. And these are my former AP Lang students. And we are having a conversation today. Well, it was today, all about culture and where we cross the line in costume. So around the Halloween time of year, I like to ask them this question, to what extent can we cross cultural lines when we're talking about costume? So students had about 3 days to prepare for this conversation, and that consisted of reading a series of articles. So I gave them about 10 articles that explored a huge variety of instances, examples of where this is taking place, and just really kind of left it for them to come up with definitions. And it was a very hard thing for them to do. So I will leave this relatively uncommented on at this point, because I want you guys to hear genuinely what happened. And then Marie and I want to debrief for you some of the next steps that we would take, whether or not we would speak up in the moment, whether it would be feedback on a rubric, things like that.
Yes. And so another thing that we want you to get out of today's episode is how to give feedback, like Amanda just said, and then also some ideas that we'll talk about at the end of how to use something like this for an assessment, like specifically what we're looking for when it comes to assessing listening and speaking skills. So let's just jump into it and cue that music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, a podcast for educators challenging the status quo. I'm Amanda, and I'm a high school English teacher in Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm also a high school English teacher in Southern California. We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
All right, friends, I meant to say in the intro, and I totally forgot, that if you don't already have our free workbook that comes with this series, make sure you take a moment to grab that. Obviously, if you're driving, please, both hands on the wheel. But if you have a moment to head to bravenewteaching.com or to the show notes for this episode and get yourself that workbook. It's got kind of some prompting and just like note-taking guide for all three of these episodes. Without any further ado, let's jump in. So this is an AP Lang, which is generally 11th grade, right? That in my area, it's an 11th grade class. Mm-hmm. Same for you. And you all were having a conversation virtually, correct?
Yes, this is during the 2020 school year and is very, very much at the beginning part of the semester and our first real attempt at something relatively formal. It was technically a fishbowl. We were using Google Jamboard to help us with the order of discussion. So that's not really what we're going to talk about today. If you're interested in that, I can link a blog post that I wrote about it for you. What we really want to talk to you about is the conversation itself, and the things that we notice going on that are strong, the things we want to set goals for future conversations, the things that we might try to remedy on the spot, and the things that we might try to remedy within a rubric or on the back end when we talk to kids in reflection.
Absolutely. So Amanda's got two about 5-minute sections for us. We're going to start with the first one and then play it out. And then she and I are going to chit chat a little bit, and then she'll play the second one, and then we'll chit chat a little bit. So let's do it. Go for it, my friend.
All right. This is the very beginning of the conversation, about 5 minutes.
About the Moana. I actually read that like the actress that played her, or that like put her voice in it, she thought that it was okay for them, for girls to dress up because they just want to be, her. But at the same time, it's not offensive to her, but it can be offensive to like a lot more people that are actually native too. You know what I mean? So it's like, some people are offended and some people aren't. So it's like, I agree with, are you done? Mm-hmm. Sorry. Yeah. No, you're fine. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I read the same article as you, and the girl that did play her, she thought it was so nice that like everyone was appreciating her character, and like the the little girls that are dressing up as her idolize that character, and they're like, their intents are very good, and like they have good intentions. They aren't like making fun of anything. Like that's a character that they look up to, and she stands for something good. And like Halloween is just like a fun way to like represent the people that you look up to and idolize. And little kids, that's what they do. They don't have any malicious intent behind it. They aren't trying to hurt anyone's feelings or make any jokes. They're just doing what they like.
I totally agree with that. On one side, people are saying that like dressing up from like in a costume from some culture could be a way of appreciating the culture almost. But then on the other side of it, people say that if you really wanted to learn about the culture and appreciate that culture, then you should do your own research and not make a costume about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just in today's day and age, there's so much that's like on the line of what's offensive and what's not. And there's always those people that get easily offended or the people that don't quite see the other side of it. So I think like with the whole Moana thing, it's hard to know like who's just appreciative of the character, who's like trying to have a malicious intent.
Yes.
Okay, going off of that, I feel like at least when it comes to younger children, that's they're never having the intention of being malicious or going against a certain community or race. It's always other people kind of putting that idea in their own head when it comes to at least younger children, because of course they're not going to come up with a costume with the intent of being offensive to people or anything like that. It's always going to be potentially like adults or people of that culture getting offended. It's never their intent to do that.
I agree with that. And I think with the case of the little girls wearing like the costumes and stuff from Moana, I don't think there's so much mimicking Polynesian culture or anything like that. I think the movie itself has kind of it has added to American culture, and it's kind of taken bits and pieces of American or Polynesian culture and brought it into the mainstream. And so I think that the people wearing these costumes are more appropriating the culture of the movie or aspects of American culture as opposed to like authentic Polynesian culture.
I agree with. I would say that when kids are dressing up as Moana, it's more of cultural appreciation than appropriation. But I do think it is appropriation when it is something that is meant to be laughed at, or it's something that just is disrespectful to someone's culture. So, for example, the tranny granny one, that was obviously meant to be laughed at, and that perpetuates a harmful stereotype to transgender people who still struggle to get respect. And also, I saw another one that was sexy Native American princess or something of that kind. And that is just incredibly disrespectful to their culture and their beliefs. So that's when it crosses the line and becomes appropriation, when it's meant to be laughed at or just disregards all of their beliefs.
All right. So I'm pausing the conversation there because, man, like that was only 5 minutes, but there's a lot that just happened. And Maria's hearing this for the first time. So we're really bringing you guys some raw feedback today because this is what it's like, right? In a real discussion, you don't know what the kids are going to say. You don't know what you're going to say. So I'm dying to hear just like your general reactions and thoughts, Marie.
Well, there are some things that I know that you as an instructor did. I mean, just knowing you, but even just listening to this conversation between your students, I know that you gave them really usable texts that were extremely accessible for their level and their critical thinking skills and exactly where they were at. So they had stuff to use, and it sounded like you had given them some definitions of some terms and some terminology. So we had cultural approach. Oh my gosh. Culture. If I could use the terms, that'd be cool. Cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation were two terms that students were using within their points that they were making in their conversation in order to either further their point or to kind of like change gears. And so I saw that as like scaffolding and preparing students really, really well to be able to participate. One piece of feedback that I would be giving if these were my students is I would be giving a more formal or more spelled out tactics or like sentence frames for agreement and disagreement. And I'd be pushing them to disagree a little bit more. And I have a feeling that when we get listening a little bit further, because this is just the beginning of their conversation, it pushing them to more just like specifics and even like furthering each other, like sorts of conversation. I have a feeling that we're going to get there though. Like I can kind of, you know how you can just kind of tell with like kiddos that have a certain skill and critical thinking level, like they're going to get there. And then another thing is making sure that they are really pointing to not just in that one article but like less paraphrasing and more direct quoting and direct citation out of the text to substantiate their claims and their points. That would be one of the things that I would ask students to do. And I would even just like pause and just say, okay, everybody, it sounds like most of us have made, stated a claim or given some reasoning or some opinion. Now let's make sure that we're always using direct quoting text evidence to back something up that we're saying, or, at least you're using it twice or something like that. That's something that I would coach them with in the moment.
Yes, for me, to all of the above. And I think what's really cool to point out from this conversation is something we talked about in episode 2 with troubleshooting is if you listen closely, I think most of you probably could hear the difference between some of the initial comments and those last 2 comments. And I think this is a great piece of coaching for after seminar where I can show students the difference between responses that are overgeneralized and responses that are specific. So a handful of students at the beginning are talking around this idea of some are, some aren't, intent.
Yes. There's just a lot of like wishy-washy, which at an opening is okay sometimes. And when you're getting in, but it is a great example to be able to say, so at the beginning of our conversation, we were pretty wishy-washy and like straddling a line and not really saying anything.
And then this most recent student, when she spoke up, she committed. She said, sure. Okay. So cultural appropriation is happening when, and we are crossing the line when it is being made to hurt someone or disrespect, right? When there's a humorous intent that's mocking, like she's using these very like specific definitions of yes and no and holding on to them based on evidence. And it is generalized. And like, she's referring to just an article but still you can feel the weight of her response so much more powerfully than earlier responses. And I think that students, when they hear that, it's not about being, in AP, one of the struggles is that feeling the need to perform as a smart person can sometimes send students who are a little bit more on the struggle bus into the talking in circles because they feel like they're performing.
The more they talk, the smarter they'll sound. Yes. Just words. Just soup.
And if you want to do it, right, like come in with that evidence because that's where we're going, whoa. And that will, again, be like important in their writing as well. So that they work together.
Yes, absolutely. It's specificity. Yeah. And so that it gives you as the instructor, 2 really good examples to hold up to say, did you notice the shift in our conversation when so-and-so got really specific and really defined in their claim? Then what happened? And it's a great reflection piece. I'm really excited to hear what you have next. Well, hello, brave new teachers. Pardon the interruption. I wanted to invite you all to a pretty cool opportunity. Some of you have already had this, and some of you have just heard us talk about it quite a bit. Amanda and I have a masterclass that is all about designing and delivering formative assessments to students in ways that are really useful and purposeful and extremely equitable and inclusive in our classrooms. And so I wanted to make sure that you all have the opportunity to join us. It is our masterclass called Down with the Reading Quiz, Formative Assessments for a New Generation. And it is something that we put together, almost a year and a half ago, where we go through 3 different types of formative assessments that we use in our own classrooms that provide quite a bit of equitable and inclusive feedback for us and for our students about what students are actually really learning. We show you how to design and create and then implement and grade formative assessments that deal with students actually synthesizing information instead of regurgitating what they think you think they should know, but actually showing what they can synthesize. It also has different strategies for assessing analytical skills, and then another strategy or 2 for assessing student writing skills in a formative way, and all the while also assessing student understanding comprehension, whether that's reading or just understanding of a lesson. We give 3 different strategies for formative assessments. We absolutely love it. We have had hundreds of teachers come through this masterclass and say it is changing the way that they approach assessment, formative assessment anyways, in their classrooms. And so we wanted to make sure that you knew about it. If you would like to register for free and actually watch it immediately, you can head to bravenewteaching.com/masterclass or the show notes for this episode. Cannot wait to see you all there. Again, that is bravenewteaching.com/masterclass. Join us for Down with the Reading quiz and see the results in your classroom really change it all for the better. It is a true game changer. All right, back to the show.
Okay, so I'm actually going to go to the end of the conversation. Okay. The middle was a little muddy. I mean, as a reminder for those of us who like to forget the year 2020, this was our first virtual conversation. So like the logistics were a little tough. So it took them a little bit longer to get where they were going. But I'm going to fast forward us here. Let me mute it just in case it gets really loud. Okay, so I have coached them a little bit along the line, and this is where we pick up. I mean, can we get a little closer to that? My people who are here that are ready to talk, go ahead.
A phrase I've been thinking of this whole time that my dad would always say was, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so like, I think that's a great kind of mantra to put on this whole Halloween costume thing, where like, if you're wearing a costume, but you're being respectful and you're not mocking a culture, and you're just utilizing that, you're just very fascinated with that culture even. But I recognize there's a limit to that. There are some things that are nigh impossible to say or do in a respectful manner, like dress as Hitler. I don't know how you would be respectful about that, but that's just been running through my mind as I hear people talk about this, is like that whole culture versus character thing as well.
Yeah, nicely said.
Yeah, I agree. But like what you said, to an extent, like it's not necessarily what you wear, because there are some things that are unjustifiable about what you're wearing. But the stuff that's not allowed to be worn, I feel like is more of trying to make fun of another culture and like poke fun at them. So I feel like stuff that's okay to wear is kind of something that you either appreciate or like understand fully and doesn't have any negative connotation to it.
Yeah, okay. Kind of going off of that, in one of the Source 11, I believe, it talked about the difference between appropriation and appreciation, which I thought was really important, because it said that appropriation essentially was that you take elements of a culture and then you kind of turn it into something that's profitable and like make it like more into like pop culture, if that makes sense, versus kind of appreciation in which you actually take the time to learn and you see the differences between all these other cultures. And then you have to also make sure to receive consent also to wear like some of the Native American, for example, like the headdresses, because for them, it's a really important thing to have a headdress. It takes a long time. That's what this woman said, to like receive it. And she sees that in Halloween costumes, we aren't giving that respect, and we're not even getting any consent to like put these items from these cultures into and make it our own costume.
Well said. That source was perfect.
I think another thing that goes into it is that like you're not even just making fun of it, but if you're completely putting across like the wrong idea, like if you're just putting misinformation out, people aren't really gonna know the values of that culture.
Yeah.
I agree with that, because In source 5, they also talked about it a little bit, about how like the difference between wearing a costume and like really understanding the background and the culture, and then not understanding it, and how that actually like the effects that has when you're wearing a costume. You really don't take in, what this means, and you're just misrepresenting the culture.
Also, like some of the companies have some pretty like harsh titles for their costume.
Yes.
And that they feel like that really disrespects their culture. Like for one example, like the sexy Indian. So, and I feel like that's very disrespectful.
Yeah, not everything should be sexy.
Yeah, I saw a comment. She talked about people like dressing up as Trump, and in source 6, it talked about some girls who like took a Trump costume and like had him over their shoulder and like touching them in inappropriate ways. And obviously that is like not okay. It's really disrespectful to the person who's running our country. And so I just found that really interesting that people would even think to do that.
Yeah. So let's pause here. What a reflection of the year we were in. And I'm curious about your thoughts, Marie. I will kind of start by saying I found that so this is about the 25-minute mark, that we were still circling a lot of the same points.
Yes. And so like our listeners can't see what I saw, which is that you scrubbed like 20 minutes ahead and it's still the same conversation, but I do hear new voices. So I will say that, like, I do hear new voices. I hear a few new ideas, but it's almost like the conversation needed questions. It needed follow-up or sub questions to move things forward. And I already talked about disagreement and where disagreement needs to come in, where students need to be able, like, I almost wonder if like then as a follow-up to this with the same kids, it would be to say, okay, next time you're only allowed to agree one time and twice you have to disagree with somebody. Right. And so like flexing and practicing those sorts of skills may be something that like specific to this class, they just might need. I mean, they're comfortable talking about, they're not really talking about politics, but they're, it was close. It was election season of 2020. And so kids are comfortable bringing up like Trump and like just presidential ideas. And talking about how those ideas can be represented for something like a Halloween costume. But I think they also needed to then feel licensed to be able to disagree with one another, having to do with Moana that they were talking about earlier on. Like there was obviously a level of comfort there in talking about dodgy or sensitive topics. But I don't know that the comfort or the license was there for students to disagree with one another. And then I think that they needed avenues to do so, or like strategies.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So there are so many like memories coming back to the surface for me of this year. And, I think that listening back to this for me is so reflective of how very little we knew each other.
Sure.
I mean, remember like getting to know each other virtually, like from August to October is, not that much time when you're doing virtual learning, and our class periods were, so much shorter. So like there's a lot to be said. And we talked about this in our second episode in this series, which was last week with troubleshooting, is that norms and classroom community are an essential part of these conversations and practicing them. Mm-hmm. So everything Maria is saying are things that we have talked about or did talk about and made adjustments for in the next conversation. They reflected on this conversation at the end. And I reflected, and a lot of what you're saying, Marie, are things that I missed. I made a naive assumption that I could take off a lot of training wheels early because they were AP students.
Oh, totally. I've done that. Right? Well, with their 11th graders or their seniors, they'll be fine. And then I went, that was stupid.
Oh, right.
Of me. Yeah.
Well, and even though they're AP students, this does not mean that they are ready for the kind of conversation that I was hoping we would have. And it needed more structure. It needed all the things that we talked about.
I think it needs to be said because some people might be listening going, oh, I thought they did great. They did great. They're holding their own. Sure. These are students who have elected to take AP Lang. Like, yeah, I should hope that they're holding their own. They're doing great. Like I said before, they are using the texts that you gave them, but truth be told, Amanda scrubbed 20 minutes into a conversation and they're still talking about the same points, which then means that they needed that support to be able to guide and turn and move their conversation into different nuanced parts of it. And so then that's where I wonder if something like a big question needs to then beg that they ask smaller sub questions and they don't just prepare points, but they prepare like a question as well. That somehow serves, that's just kind of like my teacher reflection feedback piece of it to help students push conversation in different directions.
So we had 3 kind of prompts that were in the center of our Jamboard that we did use, but to that point, they kept coming back to the same place.
Right.
So even they were either so fixated on the one thing, or they were just, for whatever reason, like it just kept coming back to the same place, or they weren't ready to answer my prompting questions, and it just became difficult for them. So we set goals. We try to do better the next time. And that's all part of the feedback process.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about feedback and our own reflective practice as teachers, and then giving students feedback, having them reflect. How did you go about using this type of a conversation or discussion as assessment? What sorts of things were you looking for?
So on my rubric, I was specifically, and this is going to hark back to our first episode of this series, the goals. So the goal of this conversation was content driven, not speaking and listening driven. So my rubric was very much about claims, evidence, commentary. Can you bring a claim of your own, right, from this to the table and back it up with evidence and back it up with commentary? And doing that in a variety of ways, multiple times throughout the conversation. Now, this is a class of it was fishbowl. So we had one day for 24 students and maybe 35 minutes. So my expectations were, within the possibility of that time frame and that number of students. But my rubric was claim, evidence, commentary. It was basically a writing rubric.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. It's a content rubric. Yeah, it's a writing rubric without the formality and the structure of the writing.
Exactly.
So then to flip this on its head and to say, okay, then let's look at this for a listening and speaking. Because I think the thing that we often get to when we're giving grades or assessing speaking skills, we'll say, poise, eye contact, those are very subjective. So looking instead at effectiveness of communication type criteria, things like points are claim is stated concisely and clearly, right? So it's still content, but it's the way that that's being communicated. It's student's voice is audible and student pauses, to collect thoughts if needed, or I'm getting into the nitty gritty, but I'm just kind of giving really, really specific examples. I like to just take my standards, put them on a rubric, and then underneath the California Common Core standards, put it into terms of like layman's of exactly what I'm looking for that, so that students can then kind of guide their own performance, if you will. And it gives me something that's really specific that I can assess with, like, yes, they did this, they kind of did this, or no, they didn't do this. And then like students are either listening to be able to disagree. Like, that's where I keep coming back to the whole, like, not just when and how many times you're allowed to speak, but like the quality of that participation, like the agreement and furthering with evidence, the disagreement and backing up with evidence. Those are all things that you can get really specific about so that students know what they're looking for, so that they can then practice those skills and perform to like what they need to be assessed on.
Right. So like exactly what you're saying, if I were to switch my rubric and do a speaking listening rubric, those students who are circling the same points, they're going to be struggling on the listening aspect.
Yes.
Because if you're not adding something new to the conversation, why are you talking?
Yes, you're just jibber jabbering. Absolutely.
You're talking because you've probably been taught that talking is rewarded, like just to speak up, or you've been learning that a certain number of times to talk in a conversation is your grade.
And that's maybe early on. Absolutely. When you're just encouraging participation, sure. But you were at a point here with AP Lang students where they needed to not just participate, but they needed to participate productively. Yes.
And that's part of listening.
Absolutely.
And I think and that's also reflective in the commentary of what they're saying about the evidence presented at the table. Are you bringing a concession? Are you refuting something? Are you counter arguing something? Are you extending that evidence at the table with new evidence? Are you synthesizing two people's ideas together to present something new? And that happened maybe twice.
Yes. And I think I heard one of them.
Yeah. But it was a perfect, and this is what we encouraged you, I think, in all of the episodes in this series, and we'll encourage you again, even when they flatline, students will learn from that and get better every single time you try.
Absolutely. And this is one of those things too, that like modeling and seeing other people do it. And there's a lot to be said for practice and for observation when it comes to listening and speaking skills. So,
and students are going to accomplish different goals at different times. Like some of these kids got over their fear of speaking in front of the group today.
It's a gradient. It's a total, yes, absolutely. And it's hard for us, I think, sometimes, especially as teachers, to remember what that was like. I mean, for some, it's easier than others. I remember the like just death gripping fear. But then I also remember by senior year being like, I don't care anymore. It's fine. Like I got over it pretty quickly. And I know not everybody's the same. So sometimes it's hard to like put ourselves back in that spot of exactly where each kiddo is. So hopefully,
just make sure you give them time to reflect.
Yes. And we are hoping that this kind of reflective practice that we're engaging in through the feedback here is just, it's once again, it's one of those like observational sorts of things, because as we said before, and as we said in last week's episode, running discussions can be very exhausting and a little bit scary for teachers. It's invigorating and it's wonderful, especially when you see your students really succeeding, but it's also really hard and it takes a lot of energy and all of the things. And it does take a lot of prep. Like we're not saying this is easy. We're just giving some really great tried and true strategies for making it work for you and for your kiddos. So hopefully listening to us kind of chat through, and thank you, Amanda, for just like being so vulnerable as to just give us a former class. These are not current students. They've moved on in the world here, but just letting us be a little fly on the wall of that conversation. I think that that's something with just teacher PD in general. We need to be able to really witness what's happening in real classrooms, less anecdotally and more like true right there in the moment. Let's hear the direct quotes from the kids so that then we can give a real reflection of here's something I could have said. Here's something I would have said. Yes. So thank you for letting us do that. I feel like that was for me really beneficial and just thinking, what would I say?
Well, and I hope that this is, our podcast is a labor of love. And, Marie and I love doing this because we know that there's nothing out there like this, and how much we would have appreciated this kind of conversation just being at the forefront of, my own personal PD. So, please let us know how you like the episode. Send us a message. We'd love your review and rating on iTunes. We just love for you to share this with other teachers and, use this as PD in your departments. And, let us know how we can be more involved in creating these series to help you, because teachers deserve help and PD from other teachers.
Absolutely. Open door policies, classroom open door policies for other educators. And couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you all for joining us. We are very happy that you've joined us for this series. Like I said before, if you missed the other two or just one of the other two, you can go back. It doesn't matter what order you listen to them in. They're all just our best strategies. And until we meet again, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye. Bye.